There was a Tuesday, not a dramatic Tuesday, not the kind they make films about. Just a Tuesday in November, somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, when the city outside my window was doing what cities do, breathing, humming, pretending the world never stops. And I was sitting on the floor of my own living room, not because I fell, not because something broke. I sat down on purpose, actually, because I'd walked through the front door of the most successful version of my life, looked around at everything I had built, and felt absolutely nothing, not emptiness the way people romanticize it, not that cinematic, beautiful kind of hollow where the light catches the dust and everything feels poetic, just nothing. Like biting into something that should taste like something and your mouth just registers texture. Just chewing, just going through the motion of a meal that was supposed to mean something. I had the apartment, I had the car, I had the numbers on the screen that were supposed to make me feel like I'd finally arrived somewhere worth arriving. I had the title, the network, the reputation, the trajectory. I had the calendar that never had a free square. I had the respect of people whose respect I'd spent years working to earn. And I sat on that floor in a suit I hadn't bothered to take off, and I thought, when did I stop being a person? Wait, before you scroll, I know you've seen this opener before. You've seen the successful man who realizes success isn't everything. You've heard that story. You've nodded at it the way we nod at things that feel true but don't quite land, because we're not ready to let them land. Because landing means we have to sit with what they mean. And we don't sit, we scroll, we optimize, we move, we are very, very good at moving, but stay with me for a second. Because this isn't a story about success failing you. This is a story about what I had to unlearn, what was taken from me, slowly, quietly, with my full permission, what I built on top of a wound and called it a foundation. And about a woman, not a fantasy, not a savior, not a symbol, just a woman who sat across from me one night and said something I had never once allowed anyone close enough to say. And that one moment never left my mind. I built my first identity out of capability. I was young, maybe 8, maybe 9, and I figured out the way children figure things out, quietly, privately, without telling anyone, that the world responded very differently to me when I was useful, when I performed, when I had the answer. When I solved the thing that needed solving, the room changed, the faces changed, the attention, the warmth, the nods, they showed up. And I was a child, which means I was a scientist, which means I ran the experiment again, and again, and again. And every time the data was consistent. Be capable, be excellent, produce, and you will be loved, not in those words. Children don't use those words. But the lesson was written somewhere in the body, carved into the nervous system at an age when the nervous system is still wet clay. And I carried it forward, into school, into every room I ever entered, into every relationship I ever began. Tell me something. Did you learn that too? Did you learn that your value lived somewhere just outside of who you actually were? That there was a performance required before the warmth was granted? That love was a transaction dressed up in softness? Don't deny it. I see you. I thought if I built enough, I would feel safe. So I built. God, I built. I built habits and systems and routines with the precision of someone constructing a machine. I woke before the sun because the sun was lazy and I was not. I read the books, tracked the metrics, optimized the inputs, measured the outputs. I was running a company from the inside of my own body, the CEO of myself, answering to a board that never once asked, "But are you okay?" I built a career that looked from the outside like confidence, and it was confidence. But it was confidence built on performance, which means it was only as stable as my last result. The moment a project stumbled, the moment something I touched turned out imperfect, the floor would move. Just slightly, just enough for me to feel it, just enough for me to go back to work harder. This is what no one tells you about ambition, that's secretly fear in a better outfit. It never finishes. There is no finish line, because the finish line was never about the achievement. The finish line was about the feeling. And the feeling, the safety, the worthiness, the enough, never came from the achievement. I kept expecting it to. I kept running toward a door that kept moving. I thought the next thing would be the thing, the next level would be the level. The next win would finally reach down into that place in my chest where the small clay-covered version of me still lived, waiting, and it would say, "You can stop now, you're enough, you can rest." It never said that. I thought productivity was presence. This is one of the quiet lies of modern ambition. We confuse showing up with being there. I was physically in rooms, I was technically in conversations, I was bodily present at dinners, at gatherings, at moments that mattered to people who mattered to me, but I was not there. There is a version of absence that looks exactly like presence. It sits at the table, it nods at the right times, it laughs, it answers, but its eyes are slightly elsewhere. Its mind is already in tomorrow. Its hands are already reaching for what comes next before the current thing has even been fully experienced. I was a ghost in my own life, a very productive ghost, a ghost with excellent systems, and the people around me, the ones who loved me, who tried to love me, they would sometimes reach toward the real version of me and find only the performance. They would knock on the door and the performance would answer, charming and capable and articulate, and they would smile and something in them would retreat. Because they knew, we always know. We can feel the difference between someone who is with us and someone who is managing us from a careful distance. I was always managing, always curating, always deciding with extraordinary precision exactly how much of myself was safe to reveal. Because I genuinely bone-deep thought that if anyone saw the full version, the unoptimized version, the version that was uncertain and tired and sometimes deeply afraid and occasionally standing on the floor of his living room in a November suit feeling nothing, they would leave, and if they left, then the experiment would have been right all along. Then capability would be the only currency that worked. Then I would be alone and I would deserve it. I built an empire, but I never built a home. There's a difference. I know that sounds like the kind of thing that gets put on a linen pillow in a boutique hotel, but I mean it structurally. Architecturally. An empire is built outward, bigger, wider, more impressive from a distance. It is designed to be seen. The facade is the point. The scope is the message. An empire says, look how far I have come. A home is built inward. It is built for someone specific. It is built with the assumption of return. It says, you can come back here. You can be a mess here. You can leave your shoes wrong and your thoughts unfinished and your heart unlocked and nothing will shatter. I had never once built a home. Not inside a building. Not inside myself. Certainly not inside a relationship. I knew how to be impressive. I had spent 30-odd years refining the art of being impressive. But impressive is a word people use when they want to be admiring without being close, when they want to acknowledge the surface without assuming access to whatever's underneath. Impressive keeps distance. Impressive is the elaborate fence that looks like decoration, and I had decorated myself immaculately. Then she walked into my life, not dramatically, not the way the cinematic version of this story wants her to walk in, through slow motion and light from the right direction and music that swells on cue. She walked in the way real people walk into real lives. She was tired that day, I think. She had this coffee that was clearly wrong, the wrong size or the wrong order. Something wasn't right about it. And she was drinking it anyway with the particular resigned commitment of someone who has decided that imperfect coffee is still coffee. And I watched that small, ordinary, unremarkable act of acceptance, and something in me stirred in a way I had no language for. She sat across from me. We were introduced through mutual context, work, circumstance, the usual. She looked at me the way people look at people they haven't yet decided anything about. And that neutral, unhurried, genuinely curious look was the most disorienting thing I had experienced in years, because I was used to people who had already decided. People who looked at me and saw the version they'd constructed from reputation, from output, from the projection. They met the empire before they met the man. She hadn't. She was just looking at a person who was sitting across from her with wrong-ordered coffee energy. I didn't know what to do with that. Look at me for a second. I need you to understand what it's like to be known, really known by your performance for long enough that you forget there's a difference between the performance and the person. You start to become the performance. You forget there was ever a before. The mask fits so well, worn so long, that you genuinely stop being able to feel your own face beneath it. That's not metaphor. That's not poetic license. That's a clinical thing that happens to humans who are rewarded consistently for being something other than themselves. The self retreats. It goes quiet. It waits in a room at the back of the house while the performance handles all the guests. And eventually you stop visiting that room. You stop checking if it's okay back there. You just let the performance handle everything because the performance is good at it. And then one day someone does something that makes the performance stall. They ask a question the performance doesn't have a scripted answer for. They look at you without the transaction in their eyes. They say something honest and unarmed in a context that should be strategic. And suddenly the door to the back room is open. Just slightly. Just enough. That's what she did. She didn't do it on purpose, I don't think. I don't think she woke up that day intending to dismantle anything. I think she was just being herself with her wrong coffee and her unhurried gaze. And being herself had a quality that I had spent years forgetting was an option. The first time she said something that stopped me cold. We'd been talking. Really talking, not networking, not performing. Not the kind of conversation that exists as a prelude to something else. For maybe 2 hours. And I said something self-deprecating in that practiced way I had perfected, the strategic vulnerability that is actually just another form of control. And she didn't laugh, and she didn't reassure me, and she didn't say, no, you're so hard on yourself. She just paused, looked at me, and said, you know you don't have to perform for me. 5 words, you don't have to perform. And I laughed. The way people laugh when something cuts too close and they need to pretend it's funny. And she let me laugh. She didn't push. She didn't follow it up with anything. She just held the statement in the air between us and let it mean what it meant. And for the rest of that night, and the following morning and the week after that, I couldn't stop thinking about those 5 words. Not because they were extraordinary, but because I realized in the days that followed that I had never, not once, not from anyone, received that permission before. You don't have to perform. I had been performing since I was 8 years old in a house that required it. I had performed through school and through work and through every relationship I had attempted. I had performed in therapy, for God's sake, found ways to be an impressive therapy patient, to demonstrate insight and progress in ways that would make the hour feel productive, to show up to my own healing with a strategy. And here was a person I barely knew yet, drinking bad coffee, telling me I didn't have to. I thought about running. I want to be honest about that. When something this close to the truth approaches, when a person or a moment or a conversation gets near enough to the actual wound, the wound that the empire was built to protect, the reflex is flight, or it's strategy, or it's the performance going into crisis mode, finding a way to regain control of the narrative, redirect, charm, deflect, manage. I thought about letting it become something small, letting it remain a nice interaction, a pleasant memory, a person I would speak warmly about when her name came up and never let any closer. I was very good at that. I had a network full of people I genuinely liked, people I would have called friends, people who had no idea there was a door at the back of the house they had never been invited through. But something else happened, something I can only describe in retrospect because in the moment it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like tiredness. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, the older kind, the tired that lives in the marrow, the tired of maintaining, the tired of the distance, the tired of being year after year thoroughly impressive and utterly alone. I was so tired, she didn't fix me. I want to be absolutely clear about this because the wrong story, the dangerous story, is the one where a woman rescues a man from himself, where her love is the mechanism, where she is the answer to his incompleteness, which means she is responsible for his becoming, which means he has transferred his dependency from achievement to her and called it love. That's not what happened. What happened was smaller and harder and more real. What happened was presence. She was just present, with the full, quiet, unhurried weight of a person who has decided they are not going anywhere. She did not demand I become. She did not grow visibly impatient with my retreat. She did not punish the silence or the difficulty or the days when I was more machine than man. She would say true things, not therapeutic things, not rehearsed things, just honest observations, the kind that arrive in a conversation unannounced and don't apologize for themselves. She told me once, we were sitting together, and I was half in the room and half in the next item on the invisible list. She said, "You're very good at being somewhere else." She didn't say it unkindly. She said it the way you say it's raining, just true, just a fact of weather, just an observation about the current condition. And she went back to what she was doing, and I just sat there, caught, not shamed, caught, which is different. Here's what I learned about being caught. Shame makes you smaller. It drives you further in. It says you are wrong for what you are, and wrongness requires hiding, so you hide better. You add another layer to the performance. You build the walls higher and call it growth. Being caught, being seen by someone who continues to sit in the room after the seeing is different. Being caught and still being wanted is the most disorienting and transformative experience a person who has spent their life hiding can encounter, because it restructures the data. It contradicts the conclusion of the original experiment. It says the hypothesis was wrong. You don't have to earn this. This is just here. I didn't know what to do with that, so I tested it. The way hurt things test kindness, by pushing against it, by seeing if it flinches, by doing the thing that should, by all the logic you have accumulated, make someone leave. I was distant. I was consumed by work in the old way. I was, on certain weeks, thoroughly unavailable in ways that had nothing to do with schedule. She stayed not performatively, not martyrishly, not in the way that is actually a form of pressure, the pointed staying that says, see how much I endure for you. She just continued being present, continued saying true things, continued drinking whatever coffee landed in her hand, continued being the same unhurried, clear-eyed, honest person she had been in that first conversation. And something slowly, incrementally, on a molecular level, began to shift. I built the wrong things for so long. I built walls and called them self-sufficiency. I built distance and called it independence. I built the habit of needing nothing from anyone and called it strength, which is maybe the most insidious of all the lies I told myself, because needing nothing from anyone is not strength. It is isolation with a mythology around it. It is loneliness that has convinced itself it is chosen. I thought strength was not asking. I thought asking was exposing the gap between who I appeared to be and who I actually was. And the gap, I believed, deeply believed, in the way that only early learned things are believed, was fatal. The gap would end the warmth. The gap would confirm the original conclusion. The gap was the thing to be hidden at any cost, so I never asked. I solved everything alone, even when the solving was slow and ugly and unnecessary. I carried weight that was meant to be shared, and I called the carrying character. I refused help in the way that proud people refuse help, not with anger, but with a seamless, preemptive self-sufficiency that makes help feel rude to offer. She offered it anyway, not dramatically. She would just do things, quiet, specific, calibrated things that said, I see what you're carrying and I'm choosing to stand next to it. And every time my reflex was to redirect, to deflect, to say I was fine, to perform fine with the conviction of a method actor. And every time she would look at me with that same clear, unhurried look, and I could feel it, she wasn't fooled, she wasn't going to fight me about it, she was just not fooled. Knowing someone is not fooled is its own kind of mirror. Here's what I learned about love, not romantic love specifically. Love is a practice, love is a mode of being present with another person. I had confused love with transaction my whole life because transaction was the model I learned first, at the age when models are carved deepest. I thought love was the reward for performance. I thought it was what happened after you were sufficient. I thought it was contingent. Contingent love is not love. It is approval wearing love's clothing. And the problem with approval is that it requires constant maintenance. You have to keep earning it. The moment you stop performing, you start fearing loss. So you can never rest. You can never simply be. You can never show the parts that are tired or confused or wanting or wounded, because those parts are not the parts the approval was responding to. She showed me, not in a lecture, not in a conscious lesson, but through the relentless consistency of her actual behavior, that there was something else available, something that was not contingent, something that said this doesn't require your performance, this is just your presence. And presence, genuinely offered, was enough. Do you know how radical that was to me? To be told, not in words but in action, that my presence was enough? I had been supplementing my presence with achievement for 30 years. I had never once let my presence stand alone, unaccompanied by output. I didn't believe it could survive without the output. I didn't believe I could survive without the output. She made me want to find out. The collapse came quietly. This is what no one prepares you for. You expect breakdown to be loud. You expect the crisis to announce itself with drama, a catastrophic failure, a public unraveling, a moment that is clearly the moment. But the real collapses are quiet. They come in the form of a Tuesday on a floor, or a conversation where someone who knows you says something gently true and you have no defense left because you're too tired to build one. My collapse was a Thursday. We were at my place. I was pretending to be fine with that particular exhausted intensity that is the final stage before not fine breaks through the surface. And she looked at me for a long moment and said very simply, "What are you actually feeling right now? Not what's wrong, not you seem off. What are you actually feeling?" And I opened my mouth to perform fine and nothing came out. And the nothing lasted long enough to become something, a silence that had weight to it, that was not comfortable or managed, but was completely, terrifyingly honest. And in that silence, I think something finally stopped pretending. I said, "I'm exhausted, not tired, exhausted, like the kind that doesn't come from not sleeping. I'm exhausted from myself, from being so relentlessly me in the way that I have to be me in order to function. I'm exhausted from the part where I never stop. I don't know how to stop. I don't think I know who I am when I stop." And she said, "I know. Not, I'll fix it. Not, here's what you should do. Not, I've been worried about you. Just, I know." And somehow that was the exact right thing, not a solution, not a prescription, just the acknowledgement that she had seen it, that the thing I was naming was real, that I was not alone in the room with it anymore. I thought that was the moment everything changed. It wasn't. That's the cinematic lie, the single pivotal moment that turns the tide. Real change doesn't work like that. Real change is unglamorous and repetitive and frequently invisible. Real change is a Tuesday where you're slightly more honest than you were the Tuesday before. It's a conversation where you manage briefly to be present instead of strategic. It's catching yourself in the performance and pausing, not eliminating the reflex, just pausing, just noticing. And choosing just this once to not, I still work too much. I still retreated into productivity as a coping mechanism. I still had weeks where I was more machine than man, where the old architecture reasserted itself with its familiar efficiency and its familiar loneliness. But something was different. There was a witness now. There was a person who had heard the exhausted confession on the Thursday and had not left, and whose continued presence was rewriting the original experiment one data point at a time. Every time I was imperfect and she stayed, the old conclusion weakened slightly. Every time I asked for something and she gave it without requiring a performance first, the wall lost a brick. This is the real work, not the grand gesture, not the dramatic reversal. The wall losing one brick, then another, over weeks, over months, over ordinary days that are nothing and everything. I learned to be present, not perfectly, not permanently, but I began to practice the thing I had avoided for 30 years, which was simply being where I was, finishing the meal before planning the next thing. Listening to the sentence being said rather than formulating the response. Being in the body I was actually in the room I was actually in, with the person I was actually with. It sounds simple. It is not simple. For someone who has spent decades living 3 steps ahead of the current moment, presence feels like deprivation at first. The brain throws a tantrum. It says, but there are things to plan, things to optimize, things to prepare. It says, this present moment is not enough. There is always a next thing. You must be ready for the next thing. Learning to say not right now to that voice was some of the hardest work I have ever done. Harder than building anything, harder than any professional challenge I had faced, because the professional challenges were in my domain of competence. This, being still, being here, being fully and vulnerably and unproductively present, was not a domain I had ever developed. She would sometimes just take my phone and put it face down, not dramatically, not with a speech, just face down. And then she would look at me with the calm expectation of someone who simply assumes the actual conversation is worth having. And I would feel the pull of the screen like an amputated limb. And then gradually I would feel something else, the texture of the moment I was in, the quality of the light, the specific and unrepeatable experience of being here with this person on this evening. And it would be enough. It was always enough. It was so much more than enough. Here's what I learned about rebuilding. You cannot rebuild on the same foundation. The foundation was the problem. The foundation was the belief that worthiness was earned, that love was transactional, that the performance was the person. You cannot build something real on that foundation. You have to go all the way down. You have to sit with the rubble, and the rubble is not comfortable. The rubble is the grief of lost years. The rubble is the inventory of relationships you managed rather than loved, conversations you performed rather than had, moments you were absent for while physically present. The rubble is the recognition that the empire, all that magnificent, gleaming, impressive empire, was built to keep something out, to keep intimacy out, to keep need out, to keep the terrifying possibility of being known and still loved out, because being known and still loved requires giving up control. And control, for someone who learned that the world is safe only when you are performing sufficiently, is not something you relinquish easily. Control is the last line of defense. Control is the lock on the back room where the real version of you has been waiting, quiet and tired and patient, for someone trustworthy enough to finally open it. She was trustworthy enough. The recognition of that, the actual felt recognition, not the intellectual conclusion, was terrifying and liberating in the same moment. It was the sensation of a lock turning that has been locked for a very long time. Not a sudden swing of the door, just the mechanism releasing, the click. I started to ask for things, small things at first. The kind of things that shouldn't require courage but did, asking if she could stay, saying I was having a hard week, admitting when something she said landed in a tender place instead of building a defense around the tenderness. These are small things. But for someone with the architecture I had built, they were the equivalent of removing load-bearing walls. The structure shook every time. And every time it didn't collapse, something was proved that could not be proved any other way. The structure was stronger without the walls. I began to find, with genuine surprise, that being honest about my uncertainty did not diminish people's confidence in me, that admitting difficulty did not end the warmth, that being imperfect, actually visibly, specifically imperfect, not in the controlled, strategic way I had sometimes performed vulnerability, but genuinely, did not result in the abandonment I had been afraid of since I was 8 years old. The experiment had been running with faulty variables all along. The original conclusion, be capable or be alone, was not a truth about the world. It was a truth about one environment at one time, observed through the eyes of a child who had no other data to compare it to, and I had been running that experiment forward for 30 years without ever questioning the methodology. She questioned the methodology, not in those words. But her steady, honest, unhurried presence was the alternative data set, was the proof of concept, was the living evidence that a different result was possible. There is a version of you who has been performing for a very long time. I know because I was that version. I know because that version is recognizable. The overachievement, the relentless output, the inability to truly rest, the presence in the room that is somehow also an absence, the relationships that are managed beautifully and felt at a careful distance, the life that looks from the outside like everything and is experienced from the inside as a very elegant and well-maintained kind of alone. Don't deny it. I see it in the way you filled this time, the way you found your way to this particular story on this particular day when you're this particular version of yourself. You don't end up here by accident. You end up here because something in you recognized something in the beginning of this story. The floor, the nothing, the empire without a home. And something said stay, just stay for a moment. So stay. I want to tell you about a morning, maybe 6 months after the Thursday. We were making coffee, real coffee, deliberate coffee, not the wrong order resigned coffee, but coffee that was being made with full attention. And she was saying something, I don't even remember what, something unremarkable, something domestic and specific and completely ordinary. And I was there, fully. Not planning the next thing, not composing the response, not elsewhere, just there, in the kitchen, in the morning, with the coffee and the light and the sound of her voice, saying something ordinary. And I felt something I had not felt in years, possibly ever, possibly not since before the experiment began. I felt safe. Not safe in the way of security or certainty or control. Not the nothing can touch me kind of safe that I had spent decades constructing. The other kind, the I can be touched and I will be okay kind. The kind that requires vulnerability to access, the kind that lives on the other side of the wall. I had to lose the wall to find it. The collapse was mercy. I understand that now. The Tuesday on the floor in the November suit, feeling nothing, that was not failure. That was the beginning of something true. The emptiness was not an ending, it was an invitation. It was the space that had to be created before something real could be built. Here's what I learned finally. At the end of all this unlearning, the foundation was never the career. The foundation was never the achievement or the output or the numbers on the screen. The foundation was never the title or the reputation or the respect of people I had spent years working to impress. I thought it was. I built on it as if it was. But a foundation made of output will fail every time because output is conditional. It requires continuing to produce. It requires the world to keep responding. It requires the performance to never falter. A real foundation is made of something else. It is made of the capacity to be known. It is made of the willingness to be present, to yourself first and then to others. It is made of honesty that doesn't require strategy, of need that isn't ashamed of itself, of love that doesn't keep score. It is made of the ability to sit on the floor on a Tuesday and acknowledge the nothing, and then slowly, over ordinary days and unremarkable mornings and cups of coffee and conversations where you allow yourself to be caught, build something real on top of it. Not an empire, not impressive from a distance, not designed to be seen, a home, built inward, built for return, built with the assumption that people will come back because you have created a space in yourself where coming back is possible. She didn't complete me. I want to end there on that clarity because the wrong ending would dishonor what actually happened. She did not complete me. I was not incomplete in the way that required her to be the missing piece. I was not a puzzle with a gap. I was a person who had locked a door a very long time ago and forgotten there was another room, and she was someone whose presence made me want to find the key. The finding was mine, the unlocking was mine, the slow, unglamorous, terrifying, deeply necessary work of becoming a person who could be actually known, that was mine. No one else could do it, no one else could be asked to do it. The invitation was hers, the walking through was mine. And what I found in that room, the room at the back of the house where the performance had never been asked to manage, was not broken. It was tired, yes. It was waiting, yes. It had been alone for a long time, but it was not broken. It was exactly the person I had been before I learned I had to earn the right to be him. That person was worth knowing. He still is. Look at me for a second, wherever you are right now, whatever version of the empire you are currently building or maintaining or performing within. I need you to hear this. The performance is not you. The output is not you. The reputation and the trajectory and the calendar that never has a free square, those are not you. You are the person in the room at the back of the house. You are the one who has been waiting, quiet and patient, and honestly just tired of waiting for someone trustworthy enough to let in. You do not have to earn the warmth. You do not have to be sufficient before you are loved. You do not have to perform your way to worthiness because worthiness was never something you were ever without. It was handed to you at the beginning, before the first experiment, before the first lesson about capability and warmth, before any of this. It was already yours. The collapse, if it comes, is mercy. The emptiness, if you're in it, is invitation. The nothing on the floor in the suit at 4 a.m. in November, that is not the end of the story. That is the story beginning to tell the truth. I still think about those 5 words. You don't have to perform. Some mornings I have to say them to myself because the old architecture still knows the layout, still reaches for the familiar machinery. Some weeks the performance reasserts itself with its comfortable efficiency and its familiar loneliness. The work is ongoing, the unlearning is ongoing, the practice of presence in myself, in relationship, in the ordinary mornings with the deliberate coffee is ongoing, but the door to the back room is open now. I visit, I check in, I ask, "Are you okay back there?" And the answer more and more on more and more unremarkable Tuesdays is something I would not have dared to say 30 years ago. Yeah. I think I am. Tell me something. Is there a door you haven't opened in a while? Is there a room where the real version of you has been waiting, patient, quiet, a little tired of being protected from everything, including the possibility of being loved? Is the performance exhausting you, not dramatically, not in a way you can point to, just in the low, constant, marrow-deep way that good performances eventually do? You know the answer. You knew it before I asked it. The empire will wait. The output will wait. The metrics and the trajectory and the reputation, they will all wait. The person in the back room has been waiting longer. Go open the door.